Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get right into it, if you don't mind. We have two terrific CEOs sitting next to me. Barry Biffle, unfortunately, couldn't make it. He had something come up, and he sends his regrets. Sitting immediately next to me is Robin Hayes, CEO of JetBlue, who has a few things going on in the industry, I've heard, and we'll talk about some of those. And then Peter Ingram from Hawaiian Airlines, probably has the best destination of anyone, probably one of the most complex airlines in the industry, given its size. If you think about an inter-island business, you think about a business that flies all the way to the mainland, 5+ hours, and then an international business the rest of the world. So you have two really interesting business models, certainly interesting CEOs, and we'd like to get some insights from you. I'd like to start, if possible, with the summer. We've all talked about an interesting summer for the carriers, lots of causes, but I'd like your views on how you think it went, and then we'll talk about the future. So, Robin, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, thanks, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's energy is doing okay. I know it's an action-packed session, long day. I see quite a few Airbus people here. I guess Jeff made them stay. No, thank you. Look, the summer was very tough. I think particularly in the Northeast, the East Coast, where we operate. From a JetBlue perspective, we went into it more staffed up than we ever had before. And pretty much in every single different work group, we were well above 2019 levels at some considerable cost, I would say. But the story of the summer has been air traffic control, and we knew that. The FAA coming into summer said that their staffing levels, for example, in the New York region, were down at 54%. They put out a 10% cut, which we availed ourselves of. But when you look back at the summer, there were definitely we did have some challenging weather, but there were definitely signs of staffing shortages, particularly when weather has moved through the area. How quickly do we get going? So. We continue to partner with the FAA on addressing that. Unfortunately, the staffing issue is there's no quick fix. If we were to double the number of controllers that we hire today, and by the way, there's no capacity to hire double, but if we were, it would still take us 5 years to catch up. So, unfortunately, the only way to address this in the short to medium term is to actually look at some of these flight caps to make sure that we are not we're not overtaxing the airspace. And it's not just New York. You're seeing pockets of staffing challenges in other parts of the country as well.
So when we talk about flight caps, are we talking about next year a reduction in total departures or slots?
It's for the FAA, obviously, to determine. My view is that this has to be a fairly, it's definitely more than a year. It's really up to the FAA. When the FAA can tell us that they have reached the staffing levels that they need, I think that's the point that you can consider doing that. We don't want to do it. Like, New York's our hometown. 6% of our flights go through New York. New York has really been the most profitable market we had pre-COVID, but we can't operate as we are. Just over the last weekend, yes, there was weather, and there was some challenging weather, but we saw over 5,000 flights canceled in the United States over a 4 or 5 day period, and it's just not sustainable.
Okay. Peter, your situation may be a little bit different being in Hawaii.
I think it's a little different, but we actually saw some of the air traffic control problems manifest themselves a little bit in the spring. Our summer's been pretty good. Demand has been strong, at least up until the last few weeks when the tragedy in Maui has led to a tick down in demand for that island. Our challenges were really from an operational perspective, were from October of last year through May of this year, when one of the runways was out at Honolulu Airport. And combined with how the air traffic control system managed that, operating with 2 runways. We thought we should have been able to handle more capacity, but we were taking flow control programs every day during that period. And with neighbor island flights that are on a very tight schedule, operating 30-minute turns, if you take a 45-minute flow control delay, you've got 10 flights the rest of the day that are going to be delayed as well. There's just no time to make up. Thankfully, we've got the primary runway back again now. Things have improved over the course of the summer. This month, we're running a very high on-time performance, so I think that is helping. But there's no doubt that what Robin's talking about is a real challenge. Nationwide, air traffic control isn't staffed at the right level. That needs to be priority number 1 in terms of the FAA reauthorization. We shouldn't have a series of ongoing extensions of the FAA bill. That needs to be done. We need a permanent administrator for the FAA so that we can get about not only modernizing the system, but operating today's system as efficiently as it can be, because that's what the American traveling public deserves.
So you have laid out a number of very solid points that I think the industry would be in agreement with. If I were to turn this around and say, looking into 23, if we were sitting here in April, what would you have done differently, knowing what happened with traffic, with air traffic control and the like?
I think we should have recognized sooner, and if people did recognize it sooner, they should have rang the alarm bells to say, we're way behind in terms of staffing on air traffic control. And we're not even, the frustrating thing from an airline perspective is we're not even talking about modernization. We're just talking about let's staff for the technology we have today. Let's get enough controllers hired, let's get them through training, let's get them fully qualified so that we can manage the system. I'd love to be talking about modernization, but it is just about catching up because we have a deficit in many places in the country in staffing.
Robin, anything you would have done different looking back if you were sitting here in April of this year and knowing what was going to happen?
No, I mean, I don't think there's anything else we could have done. I mean, as Peter said, the FAA did acknowledge the issue, but it was quite late in the planning process. So we did pull the 10% or very close to the 10% that we were asked to pull, but we did it at such short notice, we weren't really able to effectively redeploy. You have to redeploy airplanes to other bases, you have to move pilots and in-flight to crew those bases. So I think if we had the time again, it's being more aware of that earlier. Because, I mean, let's be honest, there was a lot of finger pointing last year. And, airlines definitely, there were things that we could have done better last year as well, for sure. But, this year, the airlines are fully staffed. We have more pilots than we've ever had. We've got more in-flight than we've ever had. In every department, we have more people than we ever had. And yet, the same is not true of the air traffic controllers. And by the way, the air traffic controllers, it is not fair on them. They are doing a great job. They are having to work 6-day weeks. It is extremely challenging for them as well. And I think, we want to make sure that they're set up for success. So, if that had been communicated earlier, and frankly, my Robin Hayes' opinion, maybe others have a different view, 10% was just not enough. Even on days where we saw industry cancel flights and weather move out, it took us a long time to get going again.
So with this view of putting caps on capacity, which I think a lot of people agree with, what are the ramifications of that? Well, to the consumer and the
ramifications are significant. I mean, flights are a huge stimulant to economic activity. New York has not recovered from COVID. So going to New York and saying you've got to reduce flights between 10 to 20% just to operate the system, it is very frustrating. It's frustrating for everyone at JetBlue because we made a big bet on New York. We're proud to be New York's hometown airline, but it's frustrating for everybody else as well. People whose jobs depend on the airport, on the economy, who's trying to bring tourism back. But we have no choice because we can't operate at 50. If 54% means that you can operate the system, then your original number was wrong. By the way, that is 54% of 2014. numbers, right? So that's 54% of what it was then. And so look, we're in this together. We want to support the FAA. We recognize this is an issue that's not just arisen in the last 2 years. This ATC issue, as we all know, has been around for a long time. But it's, as Peter said, it's not just the staffing, it's the investment in the technology. I mean, we are behind the rest of the world in so much of what we do.
Peter, any further thoughts on that?
I think we've covered it pretty well, Jeff.
Okay. So let's talk a minute. Everybody talks about pilots, availability of pilots. Maybe mechanics is something we should focus on too. You hear about retirement, pilot age, some of the things that can be done. I'm curious what your view is, because one of our jobs is selling airplanes and hopefully delivering airplanes. You need the pilots to fly those airplanes.
Stress on delivering the airplanes, Jeff.
No, I knew that was coming. Part of the process. But given that, do you have any thoughts relative to things that could be actionable to take some of that pressure off? Because we're talking about the infrastructure now, ATC and the like. That's certainly a big part of it. But what about the pieces that in some ways are in your control? Some of it is regulatory, obviously, but I'd like some thoughts.
You know, from Hawaiian Airlines standpoint, we've been able to hire the pilots that we need. We had some challenges last year getting people through training as people move from different fleet to seats. You talked about the complexity of our airline. That's not a constraint today. We've got a new pilot collective bargaining agreement in place since the beginning of this year. We've got a greater proportion of wide-body airplanes than any airline in the U.S. So we've got a very attractive position where people can have very lucrative careers and we can get people in the door. There's clearly challenges for pilot hiring at the regional airlines and other parts of that pilot food chain. We haven't taken a view. I haven't taken a view on the pilot retirement age. But one thing I would say is that doesn't solve the problem. That delays it 2 years. You've still got a bow wave of retirement coming at particularly the big network airlines that is going to create a need for more and more people to come through that pilot pipeline. I think as an industry, we've got to do a better job about getting out and talking about the great careers that are available for people, make them aware early on, make sure that there are pipelines for people to be able to get through the training. There is a role for government, I think, in terms of providing economic support. We have student loans so that people can go to college and get a degree as an engineer or an art major. But you can't get student loans for becoming a pilot and having a career that will allow you to pay back that loan by yourself. And I think that's something that we should think about. You mentioned mechanics. That is a challenge we do have. Particularly, it's more localized, but hiring mechanics in Honolulu has been a challenge for us. And we've started to do some of that building of a pipeline. We're going to high schools and talking about the careers in aviation. We're working with Honolulu Community College to provide them instructors so they can expand the capacity of their mechanic training program. And then we bring those mechanics in and start them with us, and they embark upon that career. And so those are the sorts of things I think the industry has to do, and I think there is a role for the support of our communities and of governments to help bring people into those opportunities.
Robin, any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I'd add is I think we as airlines have got very creative over the last few years. By the way, I'm already confident that this problem is addressing itself. I mean, we're seeing flight schools get fuller again and people coming in. But I mean, I think what we did and others have done it now is, and we started this maybe 6-7 years ago, maybe even longer, creating our own pathway. So if you join JetBlue, for example, in any job, could be, ticketing agent at JFK, and you have an aptitude to fly, then after 2 years in the company, we'll put you through an in-house flight training program. By the way, we'll do that for friends and we'll do that, not family, friends. I mean, family, not friends. Different thing.
Anybody who walks up is good.
So, we can have this amazing impact on local communities around us, where it's not just the crew member that works for JetBlue, but it's other family members. So we've now got, through these various gateways, we've now got, getting on probably by the end of the year, 900 pilots who have either been through it and are out on the line, are trained, or about to go into it. So, when you think about, we have 5,500 pilots, we've been hiring several hundred pilots a year. Attrition is definitely up, as for us, as Peter inferred. Our goal is to kind of get, between a third and half of our pilots through these internal programs, and we're well on track to do that. And what we find is pilots that have come through those programs, they're far less likely to leave because they've grown up in the company.
Okay, very interesting. Robin, a question for you, and specific for you. You've been involved in a couple interesting experiences with the government. You recently had the NEA, Northeast Alliance, which was a venture between yourself and American Airlines.
Was. Yeah.
I guess that's the operative term. I think a lot of the consumers, including myself, experienced some positive things in that. Evidently, the government felt that that was not appropriate in some form or fashion. You now have the Spirit merger going forward, and competition is key to the industry. Competition is key to the consumer, quite frankly. I'm kind of interested in your thoughts, given where this process has been and is going.
Yeah, I never thought I'd end up being sued twice by the Department of Justice in 2 years, but anyway. No, I think, look, the competitive landscape is something we've been talking about for years. In fact, we worked with Hawaiian Airlines and other airlines years ago on the open skies, when you remember the big legacy airlines were trying to stop some of the Middle East airlines. And, we should not, state-owned Middle East airlines should not fly to the US, whilst we're quite happy to partner with Chinese state-owned airlines. I mean, the hypocrisy was startling. But so here we are, years on, and we still have 4 large airlines with 20% of the market each, 80%, and the rest of us have 20% between us. It's not a sustainable position. So we believe, from a JetBlue perspective, one of the most impactful things we can do for competition is to merge with Spirit. That's the case that we've made, to create a bigger JetBlue that will give customers access to both low fares and great service. We've offered and got agreement in principle, agreement, but subject to other stakeholders approving it too, of significant amounts of divestitures, more than have ever been offered. And also
some were just announced today.
Some were announced yesterday. Yeah. And the JetBlue effect, which is when JetBlue flies on a legacy airline, fares fall by much more than when an ultra low-cost carrier flies. So recognizing that 80% of the traveling public are going to fly on one of the big 4 airlines, that is where most people are going to save their money. And I do have a quote I want to read, Jeff.
Sure.
If that's okay.
It's not, as long as it's not from me.
No, it's not about Airbus, you'll be pleased to know. But this was, as you mentioned, we did lose the NEA case. But I'd just like to make a couple of quotes. JetBlue's high quality of service allowed it to compete effectively against the legacy airlines in ways other LCCs and ULCCs could not. JetBlue is a close competitor to the legacy airlines and is able to constrain their pricing. The JetBlue effect produces lower prices and higher quality service on routes where JetBlue competes.
Did you write that?
I didn't write that. The Department of Justice wrote that about JetBlue. So, you can't say one thing in late 2022 when you're trying to win one case and make completely opposite argument 9 months later. So, we've got to go to court and make our case, and that's what we're going to be doing.
All right. I would imagine, Peter, you don't have much comment on this other than you've seen competition.
I'll let Robin handle that one. But the one thing I would add is, I do think the smaller carriers that make up that 20% do provide an important element of competition. And I think there should be active thought in government policy on how you make sure that those smaller carriers have the opportunity to compete and provide alternatives to those 4 giant airlines.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm watching the zeros flash up in front of us. I appreciate both of your
thank
time.
you.
I think it was a great discussion from my perspective. I learned lots, so thank you very much.
Actually, Jeff, can we ask you questions?
Certainly. Once we get outside.
You just mentioned the word delivery, you know, I just got all excited.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you, everyone.